We totally take it for granted now, right? Pure, white light from a tiny little electronic chip. But that everyday magic, it all hinges on one single color. A color that for decades, the absolute brightest minds in science thought was impossible to create. This is the story of that quest.
I mean, for 30 years, the entire electronics industry was completely stumped. They had red, they had green, but without that third primary color, the dream of having efficient, super long-lasting LED lighting, for our homes, our cities, our phone screens, that whole dream was just stuck.
And we're talking about the biggest companies in the world. IBM, GE, Bell Labs, they all poured hundreds of millions of dollars into this problem and came up with absolutely nothing. So the real question is, what made blue so ridiculously hard to create?
And maybe even more amazing, how did a single stubborn researcher at a tiny, struggling company using equipment he basically scavenged succeed where thousands of others had failed? Okay, let's get into it.
So to really get the scale of this challenge, we have to rewind the clock all the way back to the dawn of the LED era.
So check out this timeline. You see red popping up way back in '62, and green follows pretty soon after. But then, look at that, a huge empty gap. For 3 decades, that blue section was just blank. The blue LED was like a scientific ghost, and without it, the bright white light that we use everywhere today, it was just a complete fantasy.
And this is where our hero comes into the story. But he's not from some world-famous lab. Nope, he comes from a place of pure, and I mean pure, desperation.
Meet Shuji Nakamura. Now, this guy wasn't working in some fancy, state-of-the-art facility. He was at Nichia, a small company whose semiconductor division was getting absolutely crushed by the competition. His lab equipment was literally welded together from scrap parts, and his bosses, they saw his research as a total waste of money and flat out told him to just quit.
So what does Nakamura do? He does something kind of crazy. He goes straight to the company's founder and pitches a total moonshot. Let him try to create the impossible blue LED. And in this incredible gamble, the founder, Nobuo Ogawa, gave him $3 million, which was about 15% of the company's entire yearly profit, to go chase this ghost.
Now, to really appreciate his genius, we gotta do a quick dive into the physics. Why is making a blue light so much harder than making a red one? Well, it all comes down to one really important idea.
It's called the band gap, and the easiest way to think about it is like a step. An electron has to jump up this energy step to get excited. When it falls back down, it releases that energy as a single particle of light, a photon. A little step creates a low-energy red photon. But to get a blue photon, you need a material with a really, really big step. And here's basically how it works. We zap it with some voltage, which pushes electrons across a junction. They then fall into these empty spots we call holes, and as they fall across that band gap, bam, a little photon of light pops out. The whole challenge for 30 years was finding a material with that perfect big step needed for blue light.
So the entire industry had failed for 30 years, but Nakamura, fueled by sheer defiance, would go on to solve it. Not with one breakthrough, but with 3 completely different, radical breakthroughs.
Okay, just look at the choice he had in front of him. On one side, you have zinc selenide. This was the industry favorite. Conferences about it had over 500 people. On the other side, you have gallium nitride, a total long shot with, get this, 10 billion defects in its crystal structure. Talks on gallium nitride maybe got 5 people in the room. So, guess which one Nakamura chose? Yep, the long shot. He figured if he was going to make a name for himself, he needed a field where there was zero competition. And this choice, it was fueled by some serious motivation. He'd spent a year in a lab in Florida where all the PhD researchers there just dismissed him as a lowly technician. He came back to Japan not just with new knowledge, but with this fire inside him to prove every single one of them wrong. So, his first big problem was that horribly flawed crystal. What did he do? He took his super expensive MOCVD reactor, that's the machine that grows these crystals, and he just took it apart and rebuilt it himself. After a year and a half of working on it every single day, he invented what's called the two-flow reactor. His ingenious idea was to use a second jet of gas that basically pinned the important stuff down, creating a nearly perfect crystal. He solved a problem that had stumped the entire industry for decades. All right, next up was the p-type problem. You need both an n-type and a p-type material to make the diode work, but nobody could figure out how to make p-type gallium nitride. Others had found this really complicated, slow solution with an electron beam. Nakamura thought that was overkill, so he just tried heating it. And it worked perfectly. It turns out little hydrogen atoms were literally plugging up the holes he needed, and a little bit of heat was all it took to pop them right out.
But even after all that, his first prototype was way too dim. He needed one last, brilliant solution. So he engineered this amazing little structure, kind of like a material sandwich. He built a well that trapped the electrons, and then a hill to keep them from getting out. This basically forced them to recombine and release their energy as a super bright burst of blue light.
So after years of working pretty much alone, defying his bosses, defying the entire scientific community, the moment of truth finally arrived.
The goal for a commercially viable LED was 1,000 microwatts of power. Nakamura's final prototype? It didn't just meet that goal, it absolutely smashed it, producing this glorious, bright blue light at 1,500 microwatts. He had actually done it. The impossible color was finally real. And for his company, Nishia, the result was explosive. Their revenue quadrupled. They became a global titan in what is now an $80 billion industry, and Nakamura's reward for this world-changing invention? A bonus of $170. Yeah, after a long legal battle, he did eventually get an $8 million settlement, but most of it got eaten up by legal fees. But the true reward for his work wasn't really about the money. It was about the complete and total transformation of our world. Once Nakamura unlocked blue, white LEDs suddenly became possible, and a revolution started. I mean, just look at this. In 2010, LEDs were only 1% of the home lighting market. By 2022, they were over half. That is a massive shift in just a decade, and they're on track to be pretty much all of our lighting really soon.
And why does that matter? Well, the energy savings are just staggering. A full switch to LED lighting across the globe could save 1.4 billion tons of CO2. To put that in perspective, that's like taking nearly half the cars on the entire planet off the road, all from one person's stubborn refusal to give up.
For his incredible work, Shuji Nakamura, along with 2 other pioneers in this field, was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2014. It's an amazing story that just proves that the biggest breakthroughs don't always come from the biggest labs, but from the most stubborn, most determined minds. So it kind of leaves you with a question, right? What modern impossibility is just out there waiting for its own underdog innovator?